Djokovic versus Australia. The tennis #1 asks a judge to stop him being deported. As the Australian government says he's in breach of the vaccination rules for visitors, his hearing in Melbourne begins within the hour.
Novak Djokovic's supporters have been protesting for days and have been calling on the authorities to allow the world #1 to play and defend his title.
We'll be looking at the reaction within tennis and beyond. Also tonight, 19 people have been killed in a New York apartment building in a fire that's been called the city's worst for 30 years. Shortening COVID isolation in England, a minister says if approved, it would ease staff shortages. The baby boy lost in the chaos of Kabul airport and now reunited with his relatives. And in the dramatic final moments of the fourth test, England deny Australia a clean sweep in the Ashes. Good evening. A tennis champion with a title to defend, a government insisting he is not exempt from rules that foreign visitors have to be vaccinated. A judge in Melbourne will begin hearing the case of Novak Djokovic versus the Australian government in an hour's time. He's trying to avoid being deported, having been held in a hotel since he arrived in Australia 4 days ago. Well, let's go live now to Shaima Khalil at the court in Melbourne. Shaima.
Well, in less than an hour, a judge will hear arguments on both sides. Novak Djokovic's lawyers say he had every reason to believe that he was entitled to enter Australia and take part in the tournament to defend his title. The government says he'd been given no guarantee that his exemption would be accepted. The anger and confusion this has caused continues.
For days, they've been showing their solidarity on the streets of Melbourne. No court appearance for Novak Djokovic, who's still in an immigration detention hotel 6 days after flying in.
Oh, mate, I haven't slept since he's come off the plane. We're all sick to the stomach.
It's a very unfortunate situation for Australia. It's becoming very embarrassing.
The prospect of Djokovic's deportation has sparked a sporting and diplomatic storm. And today, former Wimbledon champion Andy Murray weighed in, saying the row is really not good for tennis at all. The anger continues in his home country of Serbia, with another day of protests in the capital Belgrade and fury from his family. His mother Diana criticized the living conditions where he's being kept.
They locked him up because it is a prison, the place he is in right now. It is not a detention facility, it is a prison. They are not giving him breakfast. He only gets lunch and dinner. For breakfast, nothing.
This was Djokovic arriving on Wednesday. His legal team say he was granted a vaccine exemption from Tennis Australia because he tested positive for COVID-19 on the 16th of December. That was also the day when these pictures were taken, showing the tennis player maskless at a ceremony in Serbia where he was honoured with his own postage stamps. It's unclear at which point he took the PCR test and when he knew he had COVID. Djokovic's lawyers have said that on January the 1st, he received a document from the government's Home Affairs Department telling him his travel declaration responses indicated he met the requirements for a quarantine-free arrival into Australia. But in its court submission, released hours before the hearing, the government said it had not given the tennis star an assurance about his vaccine waiver, adding that an email from the Home Affairs Department was not a guarantee that his so-called medical exemption would be accepted. The legal document also challenged Djokovic's claim for a medical exemption on the basis he contracted COVID-19 in mid-December, saying there was no suggestion he had acute major medical illness. Just a week before the Australian Open begins, a judge will now decide whether the 9-time champion will be able to defend his title.
Well, we understand that Tennis Australia have asked the court if they can know by Tuesday whether or not Djokovic will be taking part in the tournament for scheduling reasons, but the judge said the court would not be rushed. So yes, the arguments will be presented in the next few hours, but it's unclear whether we'll get a decision today.
Shaima, thank you very much. Shaima Khalil, our correspondent in Melbourne. 19 people, including 9 children, have been killed in a fire that's been called the worst for 30 years in New York. It happened in a 19-floor apartment building in the Bronx. Dozens of people are being treated for injuries. Our correspondent Neda Tawfiq has more.
It's the worst fire the city has seen in decades. As this high-rise building in the Bronx went up in flames, no part was spared. Firefighters arrived within 3 minutes after a blaze broke out in a duplex apartment. Crews found victims on each floor, some in cardiac and respiratory arrest. In those terrifying moments, residents were rescued from their windows and in smoke-filled hallways.
I had to grab my dogs, and one got stuck on the steps, and then I had to let the fireman come back because he had a little kid with no shoes on.
Dozens are in hospital with life-threatening injuries. Tragically, among the dead are children.
This is a horrific, painful moment for the city of New York. And the impact of this fire is going to really bring a level of just pain and despair.
The cause of the fire is still unknown. So too is the true extent of the devastation. Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, New York.
The Education Secretary says shortening the COVID isolation period in England would be helpful in dealing with staffing shortages. Nadeem Zahawi said any decision would be based on advice from the UK Health Security Agency, and he said that teacher absences would rise now that schools are back. Here's our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
The good news is that booster jabs are holding fast against the Omicron wave. Even as new cases have surged, hospital admissions remain a long way off the peaks seen this time last year. But hundreds of thousands of people are currently isolating for at least 7 days. So now there's a suggestion that in England at least, that period could be cut to 5 days instead.
I think if the experts, and I have to defer to the UK Health and Security Agency, deem it appropriate that you can have 2 negative tests on consecutive days, as we do now with day 6 and 7, then it's a good thing to keep under review.
Some experts agree a 5-day isolation period could be safely introduced.
You're generally infectious for about 2 days before you develop symptoms to about 3, maybe 4 days afterwards. So limiting the cut-off point to 5 days wouldn't really substantially increase risk.
So you think the advantages outweigh any possible risks?
That would have considerable benefits in terms of staffing without significantly increasing the risk of disease transmission. So I think we should do that.
Lateral flow tests have played a vital role in this current stage of the pandemic. So Mr. Zahawi was quick to deny reports the government was planning to start charging for them. And Labour's Shadow Chancellor says people need to be able to test regularly to stop passing on the virus.
Lateral flow tests are absolutely essential to keep us protected and to keep our economy open.
There is another potential threat to staffing levels on the horizon. All healthcare workers in England with direct contact with patients need to have had 2 COVID jabs by the end of March, or they risk losing their jobs. One NHS boss acknowledges that could affect around 10% of his workforce.
We have approximately 14,000 staff at King's. But I am confident.
So more than 1,000, you could lose more than 1,000 staff.
Well, it's an extreme position, but I am confident that, and we're already seeing a number of staff choosing to be vaccinated.
The push on vaccinations and boosters, not just for NHS staff, but for all of us, continues. But even though the Omicron wave is not yet over, ministers are clearly thinking about what comes next and how we live with COVID in the months to come. Dominic Hughes, BBC News.
And the latest official figures on the virus show 141,472 new infections in the latest 24-hour period. On average, there were nearly 174,000 new cases per day in the last week. There have been another 97 deaths of people who died within 28 days of a positive test result. On average in the last week, there were 185 deaths per day. The total number of people who've died with COVID is now 150,154. On vaccinations, 35.5 million people have had a booster jab, and that means more than 61% of those aged 12 and over have had 3 doses of a vaccine. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has ordered an inquiry after 100,000 people became trapped in their vehicles in a blizzard which caused at least 20 deaths. Sudden heavy snow caught day trippers heading to the popular hill resort of Murray on Friday, with trees coming down on the road and some people freezing to death in their cars. Our correspondent Farhad Javed reports.
They thought it would be a family outing in the snow. But for many, it turned into a tragedy. Most of the dead are members of the same families. Officials say despite the warnings of dangerous weather, thousands of tourists descended on the small hill station of Murray. Many ended up with their cars trapped in a meter of snow. Samina's terrified family was stuck in their car all night.
It was very difficult. I could sense death everywhere. There was a mountain of snow all around us, and we were just praying for God to help us.
Pakistan Army's units are now clearing the roads clogged with snow and stranded cars. At least 500 families are in shelters, but there is anger at the authorities.
Many roads like this are still blocked, and while road clearance operation is being carried out, there is massive criticism against local and provincial authorities. Even federal government has also been criticized and held responsible, especially for the loss of life. And many say that these lives could have been saved had the government taken action well in time.
Electricity was lost and the communication was not proper. Traffic was so jammed and people are not able to get here along with the staff or along with the stuff they need.
The Prime Minister Imran Khan has ordered an inquiry into what went wrong. More snow is expected next week. And many want more than just a weather warning to prevent a similar tragedy again. Farhad Javed, BBC News, Murray.
Unhealthy, unsafe homes. A BBC investigation has revealed the conditions in which some asylum seekers are being housed, with defects from mould and leaks to collapsing ceilings. Charities say even getting through to a national helpline to register issues can be difficult, and some get reports of substandard accommodation every week. Here's what our correspondent Dominic Kashiani has discovered.
Look this one. And this one is same broken. Look, this one.
A domestic crisis. The family living here is seeking asylum and safety. The father is recording video for the government's national support line.
And look the electricity.
A BBC investigation has discovered evidence of some homes provided to asylum seekers with serious safety concerns. Homes like this one. When a family housed in West Yorkshire warned of a crumbling ceiling, it was temporarily repaired. And then it collapsed. The mother suffered concussion as she protected her baby.
I was in the room upstairs and all of a sudden I heard a noise. Mrs. shout like, ow, like, and when I ran down, Mrs. was on the floor. All the plaster, all wood was on her head. My baby was shouting, screaming on the other corner.
It could have hit your baby?
It hit my baby. I could lose my baby today.
How many times did you complain about the state of the house?
I have complained before several times about my ceiling in the living room.
Adam's child was lucky, but this baby from another family less so. Pictures following a different ceiling collapse last year. The provider of these homes said it responded when it was made aware of the dangers. 3 companies share a £4 billion 10-year-long contract to house asylum seekers. A 4th contract goes to a charity running a national helpline to handle complaints. More than 30 organisations working with thousands of asylum seekers have told the BBC they think some of the housing is unacceptable. 8 out of 10 said they heard concerns about accommodation most weeks. The vast majority said it took too long to get action when they contacted the national helpline.
I've worked in this area, I've worked for nearly 20 years, and I've never seen it as bad in terms of the housing and the accommodation that people are experiencing. Our partners across the sector are also reporting very similar things. We are very, very worried that there is going to be some catastrophic incident.
At this house in Manchester, the residents say they repeatedly tried to complain about a blockage before it became this sewage flood. The company managing this home won't comment, but the BBC understands it's sure it did everything it could once it was aware of what had happened. The companies that have responded to the BBC say they're fulfilling all of their contractual obligations. And while the Home Office says they're providing a good standard of accommodation, it won't release data on their performance. As for the national phone line, officials say it's faced unprecedented demand in the past year, but insist it's now meeting all of its targets. Adam says he wants the government to reveal how well it's monitoring the contracts and the state of some of the homes.
I don't want any compensation. I want my daughter, I want my family. I don't want someone to be a victim like me in the future.
Hello. Dominic Kashani, BBC News in Leeds.
Morrisons is scrapping use-by dates on most of its milk and asking customers to use a sniff test instead to see if the milk is still usable. Well, our correspondent Dan Johnson is here in the studio now. What's their reasoning for this, Dan?
Well, this is all about trying to reduce food waste because 490 million pints of milk are tipped away every year. And Morrisons thinks it can improve that by changing the use-by date on the cartons of milk, effectively throw it away now, for a best before date, which is more like guidance as to when the milk is at its best quality. They want to combine that with trusting us to use our own sense of smell and our judgment to determine whether the milk is still fit to drink. And they think it's safe that milk, if it's stored properly and is of good quality, is still safe for a good few days after that initial expiry date. They're the first supermarket to try this, but because the dairy farming industry contributes quite a lot to carbon emissions and climate change, this has been widely welcomed by environmental organisations with a hope that others may follow. But what nobody's been able to explain is what you should do if COVID's taken your sense of smell away.
Slightly trickier in that scenario. Dan Johnson, thank you. In the chaos at Kabul airport last August, as thousands tried to escape the Taliban, a 6-week-old baby became separated from his parents. They ended up in the US knowing nothing of his fate. Now he has been found in the care of a taxi driver in Kabul. Our correspondent Quentin Somerville has the story.
Salam. Amid Afghanistan's 1,000 tragedies, a small beam of sunshine. Sohail was only 40 days old when he was lost as his family escaped Kabul. He's now back in his auntie's arms. Sohail is in good health, his aunt says. We're a bit unfamiliar for him, but he's been very good and he hasn't cried. He's been sleeping well. He's only just woken up. In the chaos that followed the Taliban's takeover here in August, an exodus as families fled the country. Sohail's dad was a security guard at the US Embassy. They joined the flood of people rushing to leave. Like others shown here, he was handed to US Marines guarding the airport fence. Once inside, the family couldn't find him. They left for the United States. Taxi driver Hamid Safi says he found the boy all alone by the roadside inside the airport. Unable to find the family, he says, he took him home. As a father, I know how it feels to have children, Mr. Safi tells me. I couldn't leave him alone, so I saved him and took care of him, and my wife fed him. With no son of his own, Mr. Safi was reluctant to let the boy go. It took weeks of negotiation and some time in Taliban detention before he handed Sohail back. He, his wife and his daughters are distraught without the boy. The last 5 months have been enormously difficult for many Afghan families, but none more so than this family. Having Sohail back is an enormous relief, and the hope is now that he will join his brothers and sisters and his mum and dad in the United States. Now in Michigan, Sohail's parents have asked the US government to fly him to them. After so long apart, the baby only responds to Mohammed, the name Mr. Safi gave him. But now he's back with him. His family says Sohail will soon rediscover who he is. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Kabul.
Now, the day began with dramatic scenes in the 4th Ashes Test. Let's join John Watson for all the details in the sport. John?
Yes, Michelle, many thanks indeed. That is where we begin with the fourth Ashes test, where England secured a draw in Sydney to avoid a possible 5-0 series whitewash. Australia have already won the Ashes, but couldn't take the 10 wickets they needed on the final day for victory, as Patrick Geary reports.
5 days of cricket decided in one ball. The Ashes might be gone, but this still matters. England's job was simple but not easy: survive. Haseeb Hameed couldn't do it. His place is in doubt, as previously was Zach Crawley's. But here he was, batting in a bubble, untroubled. He made 77 before it popped.
That's out.
3 wickets down, but look up, the rain was coming in. The clouds had helped England, now could their stars. Injured Ben Stokes fought hard, in such pain that every run stung. Joe Root went, but Stokes batted on with a wounded side, but willing heart. 13 balls left, 2 wickets left, when Jack Leach became one of them. Now the Aussies could do it in one delivery, maybe the very final delivery to Jimmy Anderson.
He's done it, he's survived it, England have survived it.
And breathed, the rescue was complete.
Coming into the game, I spoke a lot about putting some pride back into English cricket and into the test performances, and I think the fight and the desire and the character shown today and throughout the 5 days has done that in a small way.
This was just a draw, but England waved no white flag, so there will be no whitewash. Patrick Geary, BBC News.
All of the day's FA Cup action follows the news, so if you don't want to know the scores, look away briefly. Nottingham Forest knocked out Arsenal, ending their hopes of adding to their record number of cup wins. It was a memorable day for Forest. Lewis Grabham with the only goal against the 14-time winners, who wore an all-white strip to raise awareness of knife crime. The pick of the 8 other ties today. Premier League sides Liverpool and Tottenham avoided an upset. Both trailed teams from the 3rd tier before scoring 7 goals between them. West Ham came out on top in an all-Premier League tie. They face a trip to 6th tier Kidderminster in the 4th round. There was another shock in the Women's Super League, where the leaders Arsenal, unbeaten all season, lost to bottom side Birmingham City. They won 2-0, Libby Smith here with their first, as they climb off the foot of the table. Manchester City are up to 5th. They beat Brighton 6-0 as England captain Steph Houghton returned from injury. Plenty more over on the BBC Sport website tonight, including the full draw for the 4th round of the FA Cup. That, though, is all from me, Mishal.
John, thank you very much. And just before we go, if you're in the north of Scotland tonight, you may just get a glimpse of the Northern Lights. That's one of the regions where the spectacular natural phenomenon was seen last night from Caithness, Moray and Aberdeenshire, as well as from Northumberland, South Tyneside and Teesside. Well, cloud over northeast England is making a repeat sighting unlikely from there. But if you are in northern Scotland, our weather colleagues say the skies are looking clear overhead. So good luck with the chance of another sighting. That's where we will leave you. The news wherever you are is coming up next on BBC One, but from all of us here tonight, goodbye.
The BBC World Service is a powerhouse. It's the world's radio station. How cool is that?
There were many occasions like the landing on the moon, which I learned about through the BBC World Service.
The BBC has provided